It is House of Strauss. We are joined by Jason Timpf of The Volume, hardest working man on YouTube, or so I've branded him right here. It is true, though. Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It was good to finally meet you in person out in Vegas. It was kind of funny too, because that conversation we ended up having, which is the reason why we're doing this pod, I was like kind of listening from a different spot on the table, and you kept like saying like kind of similar things that I've said on the show before. And I'm actually really excited to dive into this topic because I think we have a similar view. I'm gonna say that it's a romantic view of the game, but I think it's like kind of like it's like the art versus science kind of thing. I think we have a similar view of the game there. I'm excited to dive into it a little bit.
I almost wonder if it's an anti-romantic view of the game. And I will tease it. Jason and I will try to unlock the secret of what winning is all about in the NBA. But before we get into that topic, I think we should hit some of the topics you've been speaking about recently. And for instance, you just explained how to fix Team USA. People are a little bit worried. A little bit shaky against South Sudan, a little bit shaky against Germany. What is going on? Are they doing the standard thing that they do where they look a little bit shaky and then round into form when the games truly do matter? Or does Team USA need Coach Jason Timpf to fix them in a matter of minutes? What say you?
I think, first of all, I think people need to acknowledge there is a difference in FIBA competition now compared to what it was 30 years ago. That goes without saying. I saw a stat actually this morning on Instagram. It was during the era of the 1992 Dream Team, there were single-digit NBA players that were playing for other FIBA teams. And in this tournament, there's over 60. So like that's a very basic description of that. And so expecting Team USA to like just run roughshod over everybody is silly. That's just not really possible. There's something to be said about diminishing returns too, and you have stars playing roles. That goes without saying. Yeah. Like it's not just the simple math equation of adding up talent. That said, I think we can all agree they shouldn't be in these knockdown, drag-out fistfights with teams like South Sudan and Germany. So they're obviously leaving some meat on the bone. And I'm not sure if you've heard anything behind the scenes, but I'm convinced that there's some sort of directive to keep Joel Embiid with the starters. Because a simple swap of just one simple swap of AD for Embiid rectifies a lot of issues in both units. So for instance, Embiid can't guard on the perimeter. So he has to defend in a drop coverage, meaning he's going to hang out closer to the basket, and you're asking your guards to chase over the top. Well, who's in that starting lineup? Steph Curry, a guy who's going to turn 37 next year, a guy who became a functional defender, but was never a dominant over the top of the screen kind of fighting competitive defender. Devin Booker, not known for that sort of thing. Drew Holiday is, but he's the one guy in that unit next to the 40-year-old LeBron that can chase over the top of screens. So it's like a fundamental misallocation of resources to put your worst like screen navigators with the drop coverage big. And then you've got on the bench unit, you've got all of these athletes, guys like Jason Tatum and Anthony Edwards and Bam Adebayo. And like they actually could function better next to Embiid if you asked them to fight harder on the perimeter. And so by putting AD with the starters, you can switch more, which is what that unit should be doing. They're also like Embiid's just a little bit of a ball stopper. AD's more of a kind of ball reverser, continues to set screens, rolls into space. He's easier to play with as a star. Whereas the bench unit is a little funky on offense in the half court and probably could use a hub like Joel Embiid to run through more frequently. So I don't heard anything if there's some sort of intel going around in terms of a directive from Team USA. But to me, the clunkiness of Embiid with the starters versus AD and what the bench could use from Embiid offensively, I think is the main issue they're dealing with right now.
I mean, it's just got to be tricky to manage those egos. These are guys who typically have as many minutes as you can give them when they play in the NBA. And just knowing Steve Kerr a little bit, I'm sure those considerations behind the scenes have to factor in. The considerations they never admit to. I once had a friend who was allowed to sit in on coaches' meetings, and he was a journalist, but he was a little bit more in the NBA world. He was trusted, and he was just allowed to sit in on these meetings, don't write about them, observe. And what he told me is, you would not believe how much time and energy these guys spend on just communicating to some guy a role reduction that doesn't make him go off the deep end and completely stop participating. That is so much of coaching behind the scenes, is to somehow either communicate to a guy who's underperforming that he needs to perform better without crushing his ego. And a lot of it is also getting a guy to be demoted and not become a problem. And we don't look at having the most talent as a particularly difficult coaching job, but I think this is one of the aspects where it could be. Team USA, this assemblage of stars, and I would think that that's part of it. I know that Steve Kerr loves all those little tricks. He loves to manipulate these guys in a way where they even know that he's manipulating them, but somehow it all works. And one thing that Kerr once said to me, that Bill Parcells said to him, because he did this whole tour with these different NFL coaches before he took over the Warriors. Parcells would communicate to a player who was underperforming, I guess I believe in you more than you do. I guess I believe in you more than you do. It's too bad. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's the case. And that's just one of many tricks that you're able to communicate some bad news and say that you're not living up to standards without crushing the ego. So I'm getting digressive. The main central point that I'm making is just that I'm sure it's difficult to handle these guys and allocate those minutes, and nobody's going to break out the violin for Team USA, but I'm sure that's a bigger challenge than we know about watching at home.
I remember when I was working at Verizon Wireless, that was my job that I first got coming out of college. And they had done a massive reorganization of their infrastructure. And originally they had 8 partitions nationally. And each one of those partitions had their own kind of like VP or whatever you want to call the guy that was on top of that specific, division of the company. Well, they downsized it from 8 to 5. And I remember I was talking with my general manager at that time, and we were just kind of getting into the weeds about it. And he was like, "Yeah," he's like, all the 3 market leads that they ended up, no longer needing, they just got rid of them and gave them severance packages and sent them away. Every single position, instead of it being reorganized and dropped below, they were just simply sent away with a severance. And the general idea was, it is impossible to get the most out of that talent when they feel like they've been demoted. Like as soon as they feel like they've lost whatever power or authority they had, they suddenly become a less optimized version of themselves. So it's in the best interest of both parties to just let them go do their own thing, and for us to just kind of operate with what we have. Whereas conventional wisdom would lead you to believe, oh, that's a talented employee, you want to use them somewhere. And I think that kind of similarly is what you're navigating with basketball. And this goes to the diminishing returns piece. I was talking about this within the context of the Phoenix Suns. So who's a better basketball player in a vacuum? Kentavious Caldwell-Pope or Bradley Beal? You're going to say Bradley Beal, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt if you need Bradley Beal to lead your team, he's a better option there. But you could argue within the Phoenix Suns, a guy like KCP might actually be a better fit because he is particularly elite as a point of attack defender and attacking closeouts and running his lane in transition. He's one of the best transition scoring guards in the league, right? And so there's this idea that having a person that identifies that the team needs these 3 small things done really well, and I'm okay with devoting all my resources in that direction, will actually get more out of a basketball player than, say, Devin Booker, for instance. You're asking him to do a pretty minuscule job on this team. You're asking him to defend and attack closeouts. And Devin Booker's just capable of so much more than that. And so I do think that navigating those personalities, finding guys who are willing to play roles. And so, for instance, would Embiid have some sort of backlash in terms of the way he behaved if he got benched? But there's got to be a delicate way to pitch that. If I'm Steve Kerr, I'm going to Embiid and I'm going hey man, you've been out there with the starters for 4 games now. LeBron's running the show. Steph's running off all these off-ball screens. Those guys are kind of controlling things. You're not getting the kinds of opportunities to cook out of your triple threat in the pinch post area as you typically do. So how about we put you in there 5 minutes into the first quarter, and I want you to shoot the damn ball every time you get it. That to me is a way to kind of navigate that. And again, maybe he's just unwilling to kind of see the forest for the trees there in terms of Embiid, and maybe that's why he insists on starting. But I do think that that's a big part of it, is like getting people to focus those abilities. LeBron, for instance, he's barely shooting. He's taking like 10 shots a game, but he's slotting into this like Draymond Green role with this team where he's kind of operating out of the top of the key and functioning mostly as a passer. And it's like him slotting into that role kind of helps make everything work. And so again, I do think it's about getting guys to buy into specific roles. And I would imagine it's a lot harder in this context than it is elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the selection of Derek White really opened up that conversation. And I wonder if the conversation is changing. We've always had that idea of glue guys and sacrificing your shots for the greater good. But there's something about the modern NBA and how much versatility is part of it. And there's just a greater awareness of what wins. It seems like there might be less mythology now than there was in the past, that you don't look at Derek White necessarily as a role player. You might go, well, he is legitimately just better than a Bradley Beal. Certainly Bradley Beal right now, but he is better at this thing that we are calling basketball. Do you think there's a shift where there's that sensibility emerging where the superstar in his role, as Doc Rivers would put it, actually gets the respect that he wouldn't have been afforded 10 years ago?
So I think Derek White is the perfect example of this. Did you watch the South Sudan game by any chance?
I did not. I just saw people freaking out.
Okay.
I'll be honest about that.
So LeBron gets the game-winning layup with, I want to say there was 8 seconds left or something like that. And Carlik Jones, who absolutely cooked him all night long, had a triple-double for South Sudan. He hits Drew Holiday with this pretty nasty, like right-to-left move in the lane and gets a clean look. And so AD has to leave his man, I think it was Wenyen Gabriel, has to leave his man to come over to try to block the shot. And he forces Carlik to shoot this super high floater, which ends up going way over the backside of the rim. But Anthony Edwards fails to do his job when AD steps over. He's supposed to step over to AD's man and to box him out of the lane. Doesn't do it. And so that guy comes up to get a tip dunk, and he's got the ball in his hands, and he's right there ready to dunk it. And Derek White comes flying in from a different part of the floor, not even involved in the play, and just barely gets a piece of the ball, which forces him to kind of lose control, and he ends up throwing the ball into the front of the rim, and it's a miss, and the game is over. It kind of reminds me of his offensive rebound putback in Game 6 last year against Miami, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
It's an effort play that comes from the motor you almost exclusively see in a role player. Those kinds of plays, crashing the offensive glass every single time, making an absurd extra effort defensively when it's not even in your area, those sorts of things are programmed into role players because they're constantly focusing their resources into these little things. Whereas for stars, those are commonly seen as areas to conserve energy so that your teammates can handle those issues, so that you can direct your responsibilities, your resources towards creating shots and doing the superhero stuff that you need to do. And that's the thing, like Derek White's motor never stops. He plays the same way all the time. He goes for every rebound. He competes on every defensive possession. You could argue, even though Jaylen Brown's a substantially better basketball player, that brings more value within the context of Team USA than Jaylen Brown does, which makes perfect sense. And so above any sort of politics that might have been going on with Nike, like Derek White was just a really good fit to help this team along. And like notice he's getting minutes over Tyrese Halliburton, who is another guy we would argue is a better player for the same reasons.
Yeah. And the standard he holds himself to is probably a different standard, where Derek White judges whether he did a good job by his ability to make that play that you just mentioned, his ability to do that, versus some of these other guys where, well, did I score near 20? Did I make most of my shots? These are going to be the benchmarks for them. And it's interesting to see it play out. It's interesting to see these guys who aren't typically it's almost like an all-star team, but they actually have to do something competitive. And you can say the stakes aren't especially high, but in a way they are, because it's humiliation if they lose. You could say it's a downside. It's a negative that it's almost like we're not going to appreciate it if they win, but it does make every game fun in a way that there's that risk right there of humiliation and that rush of escaping it.
Yeah, the pressure is a lot more than people think, because there's very little to gain. Like one of my favorite moments, I know we're going to be talking about Kevin Durant more later on in the show, but one of my favorite moments of KD's career was playing in 2021 on the Olympics team, because you want to talk about an opportunity that only serves to potentially hurt you.
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
literally, he's coming back from an injury. That was his first basketball. If I'm not mistaken, that was his first. No, he had played for the Nets the previous year, but like he had just come back from this injury. Like you win that tournament, no one cares. Like no one goes back and talks about KD winning the 2021 gold medal, but all of the risk of failure if they would have lost that year, right? And like that's what's kind of interesting about it is it's into like that's what one of the things I've appreciated about LeBron and what he's done over these last two games. Like, can you imagine the news cycle on Monday if he had settled for a pull-up jump shot in that situation and missed it? Can you imagine this? Go ahead.
Well, no, yeah, there's not much else going on in sports, too. So it would have been the thing. I totally agree. And sorry to interrupt and interject right there. But yeah, it would have been all downside, not much upside for the South Sudan game.
Yeah, exactly. And like on that possession, like Steph, they were trying to run like a two-man game with Steph and like LeBron basically in his head, you could tell he was like, I got the matchup here. I know I can get to my left hand, the left side drive. Like he just kind of looked him off and made the move. And like, that's the thing is like, there's a certain, we don't talk about this enough with crunch time basketball. Like you're taking personal responsibility for the outcome by taking those types of shots. Like you bear the glory if you succeed, but this is a guy in LeBron, like it literally the news cycle would have been all about LeBron and him, co-opting the game at the end and not being able to get the job done. And so it is in a lot of cases like a lose-lose scenario for these guys that are competing in these environments. But at the same time, like I do think that there is a lot more vulnerability now just by virtue of those things we talked about with diminishing returns. And if it doesn't happen this year, I do think a USA team will lose in the Olympics sooner than later, just simply because this gap continues to get smaller. And even a really talented USA team could get eliminated in a single elimination format by any one of these teams.
Certainly. And it does remind me of, it's funny, that was your favorite Kevin Durant moment was him taking over in 2021. One of my favorite Kevin Durant moments was the aftermath after they won. And I think the camera was on him. It might have been Draymond. It might have been him and Draymond. And he was saying, man, they said the world caught up. Come on, man. Come on. I can't remember the exact words he said, but he basically was saying, we've got the best basketball players. There's an American basketball culture. I'm an American. It's something that you don't hear a lot about. I think it's been a mistake in a way. The NBA has been so focused on, oh my, we're so international because that's the way they want to make money. And it is cool to a degree. I like looking at the different flavors of basketball out there. I appreciate that Manu came to the United States and really popularized the Euro step. And I like seeing the different ways different guys play when they develop elsewhere. But it does seem like there's almost a dearth of pride in what the United States is able to produce long after it's given the game to the world and it's taken for granted. But just ask England if that's assured, that if you give a game to the world, you continue to dominate it. It's not assured. And so we hear a lot of negativity about USA basketball and what's wrong with it. There are things that are wrong with it. There are things that could be done better. But I liked that Kevin Durant was being almost reflexively patriotic and saying, American basketball, we're great. We're still better than these other countries. There's something to take pride in if you're a fan of USA basketball.
It feels like that pride is only there for like KD, Steph, and LeBron, though. Are you at all disappointed in the American basketball generation that it's still LeBron and Steph that are leading this team?
Yeah, that cliff is a little bit of a concern. And it's a concern for not just American basketball and Team USA. It's a concern for the popularity of the sport stateside. Now, I don't know if the NBA cares because they've signed this gazillion-dollar NBA rights deal and they don't have to worry for a long time about the money and about the popularity in the United States. But if you're just interested in basketball as an American cultural product, and I do think it's fair to be interested in that, I think people generally, they don't admit it. They like when the thing they like is liked by other people and they can talk about it. I don't think most people are hipsters who want to like a band that nobody else likes. So I'm into that. And yeah, I think that is a worry that after LeBron and Steph, there's going to be this fall off. And not only is there going to be this fall off, this has been a theme on this podcast. We just can't make fame the same way that we used to. So LeBron and Steph are two guys who got famous before social media reached critical mass. That's how old they are, but that's true. They were famous and known to most sports fans before that point. We don't have that anymore. We're more fractured. People are watching Jason Timpf videos on YouTube. We don't have a monoculture. Everybody's doing their niche right now. So yeah, I am a little bit concerned, but it's a multi-pronged concern, and I think it's unavoidable. So what are you going to do? This is maybe one last hurrah, and we just have to enjoy it.
Yeah, that last part is actually super interesting to me because it's always been fascinating to me when people complain about what you get on ESPN as if like it's what it was like when I was a kid where you were eating cereal before school and you put ESPN on. Like that's the thing. Like, there are people who work for ESPN that I really like, but I don't watch a lot of it. You know what I mean? Like you can find whatever you want. I've always found that particularly fascinating. I do think on the American basketball front, I wonder, and this is just something that I've noticed personally in my own, I'm very involved in all these like different levels of the game. Like I obviously work out with my high school kids, all of the college players and pros that come back to town in the summer, I work out with them. And then obviously I'm working with my stuff with the NBA. And one of the things that I've noticed is at least at in the American basketball developmental levels, there's a massive focus on individual skill development. And what I mean by that is like a ton of ball handling and shooting drills and a whole lot of on the ball training, meaning like everything is like how to run a pick and roll, how to take a step back jump shot going right, how to take a step back jump shot going left, how to shoot over your right shoulder, how to shoot over your left shoulder, all these different things. And then you kind of find out as you get further along that that's just it's actually an extremely small portion of NBA, of any basketball game. The ability to knock down a pull-up jump shot is an extremely small portion of how to win. And so, honestly, one of the things that I've noticed is nowhere near enough work in the weight room. I think all of these European guys are bigger and stronger than us. I think that's a huge part of it. Like all of them are bullying us. Like there's not a huge emphasis on strength and physical development.
Yeah.
In general, just like read and react, how to play with other people, how to play without the basketball, how to generate quality shots on a possession by possession basis without, individual greatness. Like that sort of thing, I think is on our back burner in a lot of ways. And I think overseas, and I think a big part of this is those guys are starting to play pro a lot younger. So they're getting into smarter basketball situations earlier on in their development. And so, there are these great individual players that have great individual skill sets. But like, ironically, like with Luka, it's like he pretty much only shoots a step back going to his left. If he goes into a fadeaway, he's going to fade over his right shoulder. He's going to take a hook over his left shoulder. Like his skill development is actually much smaller than the fact that he's just bigger and stronger than most of the players that can guard him. And he has all the reads down pat, to the point where whatever your defense does, he can make the decision. And so I wonder how much of our actual development in the way we're training basketball players is actually impacting this chasm that's starting to form.
Yeah, the strength thing is interesting. Strength is just one of the more underrated aspects of what makes players good in a lot of different sports. And I think that's because you feel it, but you don't necessarily see it. You see if a guy is ripped, you see if a guy is built when you're watching on TV, but you're feeling that when a guy is just able to move you around. That's something that you are feeling on the court. It's something the players know about, but it doesn't always register as a fan when you're watching. And how much it matters is almost not visual in a way. It's just harder to see than some of the other aspects, but it's real and it matters. And it hadn't really occurred to me that that's something that perhaps was lacking on the American side in a way that it probably isn't lacking in, say, American football, where that is such an intense focus for obvious reasons. We can solve American basketball again. We can revisit that. I want to visit one of your takes based on USA basketball, and then we can get into this general idea of why winning happens and who wins versus who's an artist and who refines skill. So you had a tweet that says Team USA is an indictment of the Lakers. That's an interesting take. Can you get into that?
Yeah. So, for instance, if you had two top 10 players who played at a top 10 level for, what do we have, 5 years of AD and 6 of LeBron at this point.
Wow,
so
that much.
we have one Anthony Davis injury in the 2021 playoffs, which you kind of have to write off, right? Like that was an injury. 2022, both LeBron and AD were a little banged up by the end of the year, but I think they both could have played if the team was better. But as you start to look at it, it's difficult to be as mediocre as they've been with the types of top end talent that they have. This extends further. This isn't like you've got Luka and Steph, where two top 10 players, but the two of them don't have the physical gifts to kind of help you in all these other areas of the game. Like LeBron and AD are still, in terms of a duo, probably the most physically imposing duo in the league in terms of what they can do in a playoff series on the defensive glass, on the defensive end in general, in terms of just winning in rock fights and that kind of stuff. Like they are, you could not craft a better duo in terms of like a foundation to build easy roles for people around. Like you're creating easy, achievable roles. That's how they won in 2020. Like all these guys, Danny Green has his flaws. Like that's a guy, I mean, you remember him with the Spurs. Anytime he put the ball on the floor, it was an adventure with Danny Green, right? Like Alex Caruso has his offensive limitations. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a guy that doesn't put the ball on the floor a ton. But like they just kind of fell into these really small, easy roles next to LeBron and AD, and they won. And they didn't just win, they won in dominating fashion. I was talking about this the other day. Before the shutdown, they were at a 64 win pace. That's the same as the Celtics this year. Like they won their playoff games on average by 12 points per 100 possessions. The Celtics won by 15. Like this was a dominant team that we were talking about. But there's been a mismanagement of resources ever since that point, and specifically an underappreciation for the role players, which is what we talked about a lot. And I understand that there's complications on the back end. Like LeBron pushed for Russell Westbrook. Absolutely he did. He's wanted a playmaker ever since he was 2018 in Cleveland, right? Like we know that LeBron likes to play with a heavy ball handler, but it was undisputed around the league that was a bad idea. I didn't talk to anybody who was like, oh, this Russell Westbrook thing for the Lakers, this could really work. It was like, everyone was like, oh no, are they really going to do this? You know, like they sent out, I'll just be straight up. Kuzma and KCP are both better basketball players than Russ at this phase in his career, because he's reached a point where his athleticism has fallen off to a certain extent, and the bad outweighs the good. And so you sent out a first round draft pick and 2 quality starting caliber two-way players for Russell Westbrook, and that immediately tanked him. And then you look at letting Alex Caruso go when really it was all about money. They could have retained him, and the gap between what Chicago offered him and what the Lakers offered him was small enough that they should have been able to bridge that gap. The prioritization of Taylor Horton-Tucker, little things like this summer, they don't have any open roster spots because they offered a bunch of player options to guys like Christian Wood and to Cam Reddish, going back to letting Brook Lopez go for absolutely nothing. I can go on and on. I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but there have been dozens of unconscionable basketball decisions. And when you actually start to dig into it, it's like everywhere you hear, it's like, oh, Kurt Rambis is actually like one of Jeannie Buss's biggest basketball advisors. Like that's a little weird. Like there's not exactly like a basketball grinder in the front office, like a guy that's like, who's like the basketball Nostradamus in that front office, the way that like Jerry West was for the Clippers? Like who's the guy that like has this proven track record of basketball decisions? You've got Joey and Jesse, the kids that have been doing an amazing job with the scouting department, but that's like a rare bright spot in that front office. They're notoriously insular. They're notoriously like they kind of like do favors for friends and family. It's just when you really look at it, it's difficult to be as bad as they've been with those two at the helm. And when you look at all the mistakes they've made, it just kind of feels like a wasted opportunity. And I mean, you don't have to look any further than just how successful LeBron was at every other stop in his career.
Yeah, it's been put on LeBron, the getting of Russell Westbrook, but there are a lot of rumors about how Pelinka really wanted that. And not only did he really want it, he liked that LeBron owned the decision. So if it doesn't work out, it falls on to James. And Pelinka is an agent, and I think agents can be good at talent acquisition and keeping superstars happy, and that is the primary focus. That is what they're optimized to do. But that doesn't mean that they're optimized to do everything else that you're talking about, which is finding pieces that fit and scouting and valuing what guys who aren't stars do for your team. So that seems to be part of it, in addition to the other thing you mentioned, which is just too many cooks in the kitchen, and it doesn't seem like they're the greatest of chefs. That's the other thing that seems to be happening. I agree with you. I think that starting point, those two guys and how complementary they are, they should have gotten more out of this era. But unfortunately, the operation seems well suited to get those guys and not necessarily well suited to do anything else with them.
Would you agree that it is the general manager's responsibility? Like, I keep thinking, like, I'm not a general manager, obviously, but if I was general manager of the Lakers, I would have legitimately put my foot down. I would have gone to Jeannie Buss and I would have been like, this is a bad idea. We should not do this. Yeah. And I would be like, and if they forced it through, I would have made sure there was a report out the next day that like I wasn't necessarily on board with this. Like it was so obviously a bad idea in the moment. And again, I agree. LeBron pushed for it, but to me, the ultimate decision-making responsibility falls with leadership. And if they allowed that to take place, they are culpable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, your name is on it when you're general manager, and there are different views as to what your responsibilities are. I remember the late agent Dan Fagan would get frustrated because general managers would tell him that they couldn't do this or that because of their owner. And excuse my language, YouTube, but Dan Fagan would say, they're always saying, my fucking owner, my fucking owner. That's your job. Your job is to convince your owner on doing the right thing. And that is one way to view it, that it almost doesn't even matter what your constraints are. It's ultimately your job as general manager, and it will fall on you if you can't get it done. And that's just that. I'm wondering, actually, again, before the winning talk, what was your view after going to Las Vegas in Summer League and basking in it all? You're getting a bit more in that in-person world. You had your first interview with a basketball player. What's it like getting more of a sense of the behind the scenes, behind the curtain NBA after you've consumed so much of your time with watching every game possible?
It's surreal. It's a challenge for me personally because I'm a bit of an introvert. My natural personality makes I'm very comfortable just kind of like being in my routine and that sort of thing. And so I actively confront that by trying to force myself to be as social as possible, to try to meet as many people as possible. I can tell that that's going to be something that I'll have to fight with myself over the course of the next several years. But in general, like we made a kind of a calculated decision this year to turn our focus to Team USA and to the Jaime Jaquez interview over actually covering Summer League this year, which ended up being really smart because our USA stuff is doing really well. And this year's Summer League was just kind of dreadfully boring. But like, honestly, the one of the big things that stood out to me is just once, because I got credentialed this year for the very first time. So I actually got to go down and actually kind of be in the mix and get to meet all these people. But one of the biggest things that stood out to me is just like when you actually get down in the mix of it all of these people are so damn talented and all these people are doing such good work. And it kind of was like a reminder because I actually did something that I regret in the last time that I came on this show. And I talked about how hard that we work on our YouTube channel and how often we make content. And one of the things that I glossed over is like guys like Zach Lowe and Kevin O'Connor, like they write and they cover the draft, like KOC's in the draft weeds all year long. Have you met Sam Vecini? Sam Vecini from The Athletic. Yeah. He does really good work. I leaned on his draft guide a lot this year. That thing is a remarkable accomplishment. Like it is an incredible resource of information. He's got information on all their families and their background and like what their basketball pedigree is like, and it just kind of like opened my eyes to the fact that like I have my own little niche here, which is like what I do covering the games. And I'm very active on YouTube, but there are all these other like slots in NBA media that are very aptly filled by these incredibly talented people. And I kind of gained an additional layer of appreciation for that.
Well, first of all, don't regret that. It's good to admit how hard you work. I think that's a good indicator to people. And ultimately, we want a world where hard work gets rewarded. And it's a good story. And it's not like you went on here and said, I work really hard, and Zach Lowe is a lazy ass bum compared to me. I think everybody gets that Zach and Kevin O'Connor and Vicini, everybody who I will say, effectively, everybody who is successful over time in NBA media works extremely hard. It is a crowded field. You might not like as a fan or consumer what this or that person does, but they are working hard. You're going to wash out because it's a labor of love industry. It's an industry that many people are doing, not because they have to, but because this is the thing they wanted to do. And there are a lot of people who want to do that and would do it for free. So if you're making a living from it, typically you've got a very intense commitment, which is the ideal segue, Jason, to our discussion that we were having in Vegas in that Mexican restaurant at the Venetian or wherever on this distinction, this oddity where it seems as though some of the most successful winners in the NBA have a sport they love more than basketball, which is a bit of a paradox that Michael Jordan appeared to love baseball more than basketball and golf more than basketball. And Steph Curry loves golf more than basketball. Somebody would say, how can you possibly know that? And I would say, whenever we were in the locker room and we looked at his TV, it was on the Golf Channel. He wasn't looking at NBA TV. He was obsessing over golf. And sometimes the great hoopers, guys who really sing the gospel of loving basketball, aren't necessarily known as being the most competitive guys. Kevin Durant, he's won championships. He is a hooper's hooper, but I don't think people think that about him. And then it's not just KD. There's Jamal Crawford. You can tell Jamal Crawford loves basketball, but he's not up there with, hey, you need that guy in order to win a championship on your team. So what is going on with this? What is this distinction between having what it takes to win and love of the game?
I think it's important to upfront express that we are splitting hairs between all-time greats in the NBA. So we're comparing differences between KD and Steph and LeBron and other guys like that. And it stems from this basic idea, which is I think KD was probably the most naturally gifted basketball player ever before Wembanyama. Like when you actually think mobility, coordination, and size, like maybe LeBron, there's a handful of guys before him, but like at his height to be just go watch highlights of KD before he hurt his Achilles. The dude was crazy mobile, side to side, could get to his spot like crazy, and never made an all defense team, never really like got to that level as a defender that we knew he was capable of. And I think this was actually one of the things I overheard you say at the table at dinner the other day. But I think you had mentioned something about how KD like should have been the GOAT or like he had that potential. And this is something that I've thought for a while, which is that like, you know, like there was another level that KD could have gotten to in terms of dominance in the league if he was a little nastier. And what I mean by that is like, I think the game of basketball is beautiful, but there's beautiful elements to it. But most big basketball games are actually ugly. They're actually nasty. They're like that game 7 in 2016. It's 89-89 with a couple with like a minute left. Most of them are nasty. Most of them are ugly. When I think back to all of the biggest basketball games that I've played in, almost all of them are fistfights. And that really to me is the main differentiating factor here, which is a person who loves basketball can go into a gym by themselves or with a rebounder and can work on their game and be utterly at peace and shoot pull-up jump shots going right and left over and over again and just kind of be in the mix of it. But the truth of the matter is like if you want to beat the Nuggets on Saturday, you got to get nasty. You got to get nasty. You've got to box out Aaron Gordon after you were just offering help on Nikola Jokic. You've got to sprint down the floor in transition every single time to make sure you don't lose KCP or Michael Porter Jr. There's like these physical battles that you have to win. And the last example I'll use before I kick it back to you is I remember when I was watching Knicks Heat last year before Game 6. I was watching RJ Barrett doing kind of like a shooting workout before the game, and he hit 5 threes in a row out of the left corner, and he kind of like clapped his hands and he was like ready to go. And I remember thinking before the game, I was like, I was like, this game's not going to come down to whether or not RJ Barrett can hit threes. Like, he has 100 physical battles tonight, whether that's keeping up with the transition, back and forth, whether that's keeping his man in front, fighting over the top of a screen, fighting for contested rebounds, fighting for position here, fighting for position there. It's actually the 100 physical battles that he has to win tonight that are going to matter for the Knicks, not whether or not he can knock down 2 of 4 threes instead of 1 of 4 threes out of that left corner. And so that to me is like, what motivates you to win those battles? Probably not the same thing that motivates you to go be peaceful in the gym shooting around. It's a hatred of losing. And at dinner, you referred to it as a love of winning, but I think we're both getting at the same thing, which is basically that is a separate concept than my love of the game. Loving basketball is separate from hating losing. And I think there's a scar tissue that forms when you lose. And I think the best of the greatest of all time kind of pick up that scar tissue early, and it makes them terrified of it. And it makes them make efforts that they otherwise wouldn't make because their greatest fear is losing that game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and to avoid humiliation. So Anthony Edwards, when he came out, people were really worried about him as a prospect because he actually said that football is my favorite sport. He was openly saying that basketball is not my favorite sport. And I thought maybe at the time that was an issue, but now looking back, no, that's good. That's really good. It's good because of what we were talking about, that for whatever reason, some of these winners have that. But also what you're talking about, that you want the nasty, you want the brutal, you want somebody who's into a bit of physical competition. And we don't know if he's going to end his career as a great winner, but I would say that he has been above expectations and it has served him well because there's something strange going on when it comes to these games that really matter. It does become something that's like basketball, but not quite. It's something more where it's the XFL. It's one of those old XFL kickoffs where they just put the ball in the middle and they got 2 guys running. Somebody's got to grab it. Something like that happens. I don't know why it goes that way, but it ceases to just become a competition of skill and become something else.
There's a level of intensity too, and I've noticed this. I don't get it very often anymore, but it was a lot when I was playing, where when you're in a really physical game, there's like a natural response from your body that's like it's almost like you enter into fight mode. Like, it's hard to describe. It's almost like it's like a fight or flight response, some sort of like physiological response where you kind of get jittery. And what I mean by that is like, you're like geared up to fight. You know what I mean? Like, there's a very physical element to it. And in those situations, it's really hard to calm down and rely on muscle memory. And so this is one of my big theories for why, like, we see these games where it's like fourth quarter 80-80 with, 7 minutes left and no one can hit a jumper. Like, and there's always like 1 or 2 guys on the floor that for some reason can. Like, that's the crazy thing. Like, if you look at that 2016 game, the game 7 between the Warriors and Cavs, it's like Steph had a miss where he missed the rim to the left and almost put a hole in the backboard. I think it was the one that he took over Kevin Love, right?
Yeah.
And like LeBron had a couple of bad missed jump shots in that stretch. LeBron like missed a hook shot. Like, it was right at the rim and he left it like a foot short. It's kind of crazy that Kyrie was able to get to an incredibly difficult jump shot and make it the way he did, because in those situations, there's a reason why everybody's jump shot goes to hell in a handbasket. And a big part of it is like, physiologically, you're so geared up for the fight that it's like just really difficult to rely on muscle memory in those situations, which kind of carries me to the crux of this, which is like, let's take a look at LeBron, for instance. LeBron regularly gets made fun of for not having a bag. You know what I mean? For not having the polish that some of his peers have. Famously, he was doing that dribbling drill for USA, and then everyone was comparing him to Kendrick Perkins. Remember? Like, that was the thing. So like, LeBron has this reputation, but like, LeBron is built for these physical confrontations and always ends up being one of the best players in those specific situations, which kind of like tells you, who would you rather have? A guy like, let's say, Paul George, who has all of this polish in the world, or a guy like Paolo Banchero, who's big and strong and can like win fist fights in and around that short range area around the basket. And that's the thing. Like Paul George is way more skilled than Paolo, but Paul just had a 6-game series against Dallas as the number one option and couldn't get to 20 points a game and couldn't get to 5 assists per game. Whereas Paolo kind of had these moments and averaged 27. And so that's what's interesting is like he did it because he's bigger and stronger than everybody and he can thrive in those fights. And so that to me is the fascinating part of it is it's the physical confrontation of basketball.
Well, Gen Z tells me that Paul George is better. That's what I hear, which is ironic because Banchero is younger, but that's something I've long been fascinated with. Is that something that you've noticed as a guy out on YouTube? You've got an audience that is younger than the typical audience in sports media. Have you noticed that Paul George has this odd resonance with younger hoopers than one might think in a way that's not commensurate? Is that the word I'm looking for? It's not at the level of his accomplishments, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, so for instance, to that point, Paul George had by any metric a very disappointing series against Dallas, but he hit a massive shot in game 4. And it was this crazy, like in and out between the legs, behind the back to his right side, massive step back into the corner, covered a ton of ground, was perfectly contested. And it just dropped right in nothing but net. And it was the shot that gave the Clippers the lead late, right before James Harden made those floaters that he hit. And that shot I saw on social media everywhere for the next few days. And I saw slow motion versions of it, all these different kind of like romanticizations of this particular shot. And like, that's the thing. I think there's like a piece of that resonates in highlight culture. And I think that may have a certain resonance with Gen Z. Like there's a lack of real interest in some of the dirty elements that win basketball games. And that's kind of the whole thing that takes us back to the beginning is like, it's to win basketball games, you have to be willing to do things that aren't fun. Like they just aren't. I remember when I was watching the 2012 finals, there was an offensive rebound that Shane Battier got on a missed free throw. Miami had the ball, missed a free throw. Shane Battier got the offensive rebound. It was at the end of game 5. So like the series was over basically. And I can't remember if I want to say, was Steve Kerr on the panel at that point? I think he might've been. But I think it was Breen, Van Gundy, and it might have been Kerr. I can't remember who it was, but they had 3.
Yeah,
it was 2012.
Kerr was Turner.
Oh, he was Turner. Who was?
Maybe he was on the panel. It's the funny thing. I can't remember exactly who was on in 2000, who other than Breen in 2012. Even though
that's
I watched
not the Doug
finals.
Collins era, is it? No, I can't remember.
Doug Collins and Jalen Rose could be, but I don't know. But anyway, the game and what happened.
So I think it was Van Gundy was waxing eloquent after that rebound, basically talking about how Miami wanted it more. Like Battier has been in all these playoff battles over the years, and he wants the Larry O'Brien so bad that he beat everybody to this loose ball. And it seems kind of narrative-y, but there's truth to that, because one of the most common themes that you'll see for every men's league player out there that's listening, like, you ever notice how like there's that young talented team that gets in to play in your men's league, but they always seem to lose to the older guys that just kind of know how to play? And we kind of gloss over, there's obviously real basketball, strategies elements to this.
This is answering a question for me about why your top 5 is as old as it is, because you were asked to choose your greatest team, choosing a guy specifically from history. And you went 2022 Steph. You went 1993 Michael Jordan. You went 2018 LeBron James. Is this part of your whole theory that grown-ass men win basketball games? Is that what I'm hearing right now?
Absolutely. And so I refer to it as scar tissue. Like every loss that I've ever taken on a basketball court still irks me in some way. And there's usually like reasons why. And those things end up pushing you to do something different the next time you're in that situation. And like really, and that really is it. Like if you look at like Steph in 2022, LeBron in 2018, for example, those guys had been through so much at that point that there's nothing they could run into that wouldn't refer back to a previous victory or failure in their career that they could use as like a kind of like an understanding of what they need to do to survive in that specific moment. And again, like, and to Steph and LeBron's credit, like they kind of have these corollaries around the league of guys that don't do the same things that they do. Let's zero in on Steph. Like Damian Lillard is a better athlete than Steph. He's not quite as big, but he was a better athlete, quicker laterally, quicker straight line, quicker, better vertical, right? But the thing with Dame was he was never willing to move without the basketball, and he was never willing to embrace a certain level of commitment to the defensive end of the floor. Those are two things that suck. You don't think that Steph has had a lot of possessions in his career where he's run in circles and just not gotten the ball? Because, maybe somebody missed him or he was just defended really well. It sucks. It's exhausting. There's a conditioning element to it, right? The commitment to the defensive end. Those are things that are not fun. And those are things that are not necessarily associated with the love of basketball. They're associated with Steph wanted to win. And so he needed to maximize and squeeze that sponge to get every drop out of it. And that required him to kind of focus in on some things that were difficult. But yeah, like in general, I think there's obviously a fall off point. I think both Steph and LeBron are there now. I think Steph has lost a step since 2022. I think LeBron has obviously lost a step. But I think those two iterations of them were the best combination of physical ability and just mastery of the game at that point.
I would agree. I would agree with that. And I like those selections. I noticed that. I do have one additional thought on the Paul George thing. And it might be a critique of how players view other players. They are really big on we know, you don't know, which I would feel if I were them. I would feel like your opinion's invalid. I'm an NBA player and therefore I know. But I do think that they have a bias because you can either have a bias by being too close to something or too far from something. And I think that they really value the ability to do something that they themselves can't do. So they will just wax poetic about a guy who displays a level of skill, some sort of difficult display that they can't themselves do. But that's, again, to what we're saying, that's not necessarily the same as being as productive as you can be or helping your team to just the maximum level. But I've noticed that. I noticed it when I covered the sport that they would really love a Jamal Crawford. Maybe, no offense, Jamal, who's one of the nicest guys, maybe beyond his ability to help. And that was always, it made sense to me, but it was just funny how much they care about that versus, I don't know, what a PJ Tucker is going to give you.
You know what's interesting, though? There's one guy in the league that seems to get that recognition, and it's Drew Holiday. Why aren't there more Drew Holidays? Like Drew gets it. Like, did you see he got votes for being best player on Team USA in that poll that went out. Like there is this profound respect for Drew Holiday being this like glue guy, professional role player. Like I would argue if you asked people to vote for who the best role player in the league was, they'd say Drew Holiday. Like that seems to be his reputation, but he's like the only guy like that. Like why aren't there more people who are fans of Caruso or like you know what I'm saying? That archetype should be more.
I just hearing these guys and how they talk because they're looking at one of those role players and going, man, he's just doing what he's got to do. He's just doing what he has to do to get a check in the league. I think Drew Holiday is looked at as somebody who legitimately was all-star level and can do the glue guy things. And so there's more respect. He's actually making a sacrifice. He didn't need to necessarily do these things to make over $150 million in the NBA, but yet he did them. And I think that's my theory, combined with he was probably the best of the Team USA guys at spinning the ball on his finger as far as I could see. And I'm still shocked. I'm shocked that Steph doesn't know how to do that.
Is he lying?
To me, I really want to know. It would never have occurred to me. It never would have occurred to me. And yeah, it makes sense that you didn't have to do it. I remember once hearing that Albert Einstein didn't know his own home phone number because it's just not something he needed to know. But you would think somebody as coordinated as he is, as somebody who seems like one of these guys who's just good at everything, that he would be able to do to just spin the ball in your finger. It's not that hard. You just kind of put it up there and you do that. I'm so glad they made that video. I was blown away by that.
At a bare minimum, if we locked him in a room and said, figure out how to do it, he'd have it done. And I think he'd have it figured out in less than a minute. Like his hand-eye coordination is too good to not immediately figure it out.
I mean, this is one of the things I think about. This is why it was so interesting. It was how specific, how translatable is coordination, and are there just specific things? It's been noticed, speaking of Steph, that guys who are great shooters are great golfers, which, yeah, in a general way, that makes sense. It's hand-eye coordination, but those are two very different motions with your body. They're just very different. They shouldn't be as correlated as they are, but for some reason they are. I think we'll have better explanations of this in the future. I think science will tell us why those two things are linked, even though you wouldn't think they are. But I'm always curious about that stuff. It's interesting to me when I see Patrick Mahomes' high school basketball highlights and I go, oh, whatever that is seems to translate. But then sometimes you see these guys who are really great in a sport and they throw the first pitch out at a baseball game and it looks horrific. So yeah, just all sorts of little mysteries of physicality and proprioception. I'm continually interested in that stuff. You're talking about how it looks like Jason Tatum has the yips, and that just gets me thinking about, well, how can that happen? What is that? How does a guy suddenly forget how to do what he's always doing? I don't know. The human body's mysterious.
I have a feeling the golf basketball connection, I think, has to do with approach. Like the way you build out a jump shot is very similar to the way you build out a golf swing. Like you get in the gym and you just shoot shots. Like I remember during COVID, I got big into golf, and it's like you just go to the range and you just hit balls, and like you're constantly focused on building out a muscle memory. So I think there's just some similarities there. But like for instance, like would Steph be able to, like if we told Steph within a week to be able to throw 10 straight strikes at least 70 miles an hour from a major league mound, could he figure it out? I think he probably could, because there's like a muscle memory and repetition piece to it that I think he'd eventually be able to figure out. But yeah, it is super fascinating. I think also a big part of it stems back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is the competitiveness element. Is Steph capable of going to play golf 5 times a year and sucking? No, he's like, I'm sure he just reached a point where he's like, I have to be better at this, because I want to compete.
I have a theory on that too with the golf, where when I hit a shot wrong, I don't know why I did it. I actually don't. I see what happens. I go, oh my God, I towed it. This happened but I don't, with my body, I don't necessarily know why did I screw that up and why did this one go great? I don't know. And so I wonder how much of the ability isn't just your coordination. It's some other thing where you actually have the ability to know. You actually have the ability to go, oh, I missed that shot because I did this with my body, and therefore I need to correct that. And so it's a body awareness, not just the coordination, because I think the ability to know is key right now. And not to make it all about me, I'm hitting my drives really well, but I'm just at a loss right now. What's going on with my iron swing? And I'm just in the sea of doubt currently, where I've got this family trip in a week where we're going to play golf together. And I've got less than a week to figure out, do I just swing the iron without thinking anything and just hope it goes well? Or do I need to change what I'm doing? Is there enough time to fix it? I've got all this stuff going on in my head. And I think if I knew exactly what I needed to do and I knew whenever I wasn't hitting that mark, it would be better. But I don't have that ability necessarily.
Ball striking with irons is easily the hardest thing that I ran into when I was like really getting into it. I barely play golf now because ever since COVID stopped, or ever since I say that COVID era passed us and I got back into the gym, it's all basketball. During the pandemic era, like, I mean, they took the rims off of the outdoor hoops. I couldn't play basketball. It was like a bizarre era. But that ball striking with the irons is damn near impossible. I will say, you do know. I have been obsessed with shooting forever, because when I was in college, I was a very streaky shooter. And I had a coach who said to me once, are you a shooter or a maker? And that always ate at me, because I always wanted to be a maker, not a shooter. And there's like this relentless pursuit of that. And pretty quickly you identify like most misses don't have anything to do with your release. They have to do with something before then. Usually it's like your base is a little off, your energy transfer was a little off. A big one is like, I had a coach in JUCO who used to always tell me big hands, which was a big one. Like if you spread your fingers around the ball, you'll have less left-right misses just simply because of your control of the basketball, which is like, so like a lot of times what I'll do is I'll focus on something that doesn't have to do with the release. So like, I'll just think in my hands, in my head, big hands, big hands. Because shooting it's, for lack of a better term, it's a mind fuck, because like even on your best day, you could go 2 for 9 if it just by virtue of shots not going in. And so to get out of your head, you focus on these like controllable things. Did I have my base? Did I get good lift? Did I have big hands? Was my follow through crisp? Like that sort of thing. Like you just focus on these little details. And I would imagine that if you and I played golf long enough, we would pick up on those things. Like, oh, I didn't drop my hands on my follow through. I didn't roll my wrist. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. I just think you and I are so amateur at it that we're not even perceiving these things.
There's a chance of that. It's so interesting though, that you really can't overload the pan, and you need, even if you are doing a bunch of different things at once with a simple motion, you need a maximum maybe of 2 cues, and 2 might even be too many. For me, it's just, I just try to dip the ball. I have a weird kind of Matt Bonner form where I don't necessarily dip it. And so I find a rhythm if I do that, and I can kind of connect to a rhythm. But if I'm in the heat of it, there was at Summer League, there was a game with a lot of team employees they got to play in. But the problem with team employees is that they're often former players and D1 guys. One of the teams had Kyle Korver and Landry Fields on it. I didn't play that team, but I mean, my knees were shaking out there. I was scared. My first shot was way off. I was almost looking at the ground to see if I was behind the 3-point line. I got all messed up. And then the second shot went in, but that was a long journey to the hoop. And that is it's just a great feeling of throwing it up all scared and it goes in. It's just the ultimate relief. But yeah, I really, maximum amount of cues. That's the cue, to try to dip it. And very similar with golf, a swing. God, it's so simple in theory. Just a back up, but no, so many things are going on. And I liked something that Bryson DeChambeau was talking about when I was watching him discuss how he went about his swing, where he goes, I'm very iterative. I throw away something the second it stops working, and I just shift to another cue. And maybe you and we just don't do enough of this for that to really help us. But I think that's a cool way to maybe approach it, whatever you're doing, whether it's trying to get better as a shooter or golf, which is just, hey, the second the cue stops working, shift to another cue. Maybe that'll work. And if that one doesn't work, shift again. Maybe that's the best way to go about it. And that's better than, I don't know, trying to focus on everything at once.
I found this fascinating because I've seen Steph talk about this and I've seen Tiger Woods talk about this, but it's like getting out of your head seems to be one of the most important elements of this type of training. So like Tiger, there was a video, it was an Instagram reel, some Tiger's hitting at a range, some kids were filming him and they were asking him a question like, hey, like, what's your one piece of advice for an amateur golfer? And Tiger goes like, stay off of YouTube. Just go hit balls, is what he said. And then I think about like Steph Curry, and it's like Steph does several things with his shot that a shooting coach training a kid would not teach Steph to do. And we won't get into the weeds for that for time's sake, but like both of those, like Steph has some unorthodox pieces in his form. Tiger Woods famously was playing with, I want to say it was like Xander Schauffele or something like that. And he was talking about how he doesn't take divots. And the other guys were like, what? You don't take divots? And he's like, yeah, I don't take divots. And it's like, Tiger Woods doesn't take divots. It's kind of like a weird thing, right? And it's like, to that point, it's less about like, can you follow this proven path? And it's more about get out of your head and just practice. And eventually there will be results that inevitably follow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's going to work for somebody in their late 30s quite that way. I might have to consult with some people for some advice. I just wish I didn't feel the fear. I feel like that's what messes you up sometimes, is that adrenaline and fear makes it so hard to connect to that internal sense of rhythm. But that's also what makes it fun. That's what makes it fun, is that you're scared out there. You remember you remember moments when you were scared. And even if it doesn't work out the way you want it to work out, there's some sort of emotional payload to going on the whole journey. Well, I could talk to you for hours, Jason, but I am melting like a wax candle in this non-air conditioned. My glasses are fogging up as I'm talking to you. It is 100 degrees. There is no air conditioning. This has been absolutely fantastic. What do you want to promote for us? What should we be checking out from you?
So head over to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel. My interview with Jaime Jaquez Jr. 12 days later is finally airing after we got through all of the loopholes to get it cleared with the MBPA and with Chase. So get over there and check that out. Obviously, you can follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT. I'm always on there just arguing with people and having fun talking about basketball. And then obviously wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Ethan, this has been a lot of fun, man. Again, it was awesome to meet you in Vegas. And this was a fun chat. We got into a lot of good stuff today.
Hell yeah. Feelings mutual. Love to have you back on. Check out Jason's stuff on Team USA.